More than 1,500 people have been killed in the Israel-Hamas war, including around 900 Israelis and more than 600 people in the Gaza Strip. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today vowing to destroy its enemy and win.
At the end of this campaign, all of our enemies will know that it was a grave mistake to attack Israel. What we will do to our enemies in the coming days will reverberate with them for generations.
Israel is now striking Gaza in response to the Hamas attacks that began on Saturday. It's also ordered a complete siege of Gaza, cutting off all supplies of water and food. That's as Hamas, the terrorist group controlling the territory, is threatening to broadcast the execution of one Israeli hostage every time an airstrike hits Gazans' homes without warning. Netanyahu, meanwhile, said today that they have only started striking Hamas. Meanwhile, at least 11 American citizens have been killed in Israel. The U.S. is sending weapons to Israel, and the Biden administration is talking with allies. Joining us live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Iris, what do we know about Americans in Israel, and what is the latest in our response?
Good evening to you, Steve. So just shortly before this, President Biden, in a news statement, confirmed that at least 11 Americans were killed in Hamas attack on Israel. He added that American citizens still remain unaccounted for and that they're working with Israeli officials to obtain more information as to their whereabouts. And President Biden added that it's likely that American citizens may be among those being held by Hamas, and that he's directed his team to work with Israeli counterparts on every aspect of the hostage crisis, including sharing intelligence and deploying experts. So that's an update from what the State Department told us this morning, which is 9 Americans were killed in this conflict. So now the number has been increased. And the Biden administration also says that as for where these American citizens still missing are, they have no idea. Basically, they don't know what condition they're in or where exactly they are currently. And President Biden also talked to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday and told him that military assistance is on the way and then more is going to come in the upcoming days. However, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy today criticized the Biden administration for unfreezing $6 billion in funds for the Iranian regime, saying that has fueled Hamas attacks. Let's take a look.
His policy has only emboldened terrorists, and handing over $6 billion to Iran only helps the cause.
The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security said today that there's no credible threat to the U.S. homeland. But as President Biden called on other countries to not take advantage of the current situation, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who was in China today, told Chinese regime leader Xi Jinping that China should not withhold its condemnation of what's happening, and that he also criticized China for its lack of sympathy toward Israel. Here's what he said.
I was very disappointed, to be honest, by the foreign ministry statement that showed no sympathy or support for Israel during these troubled times.
The White House says that President Biden this afternoon also talked to allies about the current developments in Israel, and that he also asked his team to warn anyone not to take advantage of the current situation. But it's worth noting that President Biden did not have any public events scheduled today, so he did not come out to speak publicly. So it remains to be seen whether tomorrow would be a time for President Biden to more formally address the death of 11 Americans. Back to you.
The war in Israel is creating a new dynamic as House Republicans feeling the pressure to elect a new speaker. NTD's Melina Wisecup joins us from Capitol Hill with more. So, Melina, what's the feel in Congress now that this war is actually happening?
Hi, Steve. Good to be here with you. So right now the environment is very slow, very quiet environment here in the halls of Congress, but not for long, of course, as lawmakers return from what's expected to be a super hectic week as that drama around electing a new House Speaker continues. And yes, like you mentioned, Steve, this pressure is on now, especially as that war in Israel just broke out. Some members are adding a sense of urgency into this dynamic, saying that they need to push for funding to replenish Israel's Iron Dome system, which cannot happen right now without a speaker in that position. Now, others are even wanting to go so far as to take action even without a speaker present Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Michael McCall, along with his Democrat counterpart, want to push a condemning resolution to condemn those attacks in Israel. They're saying they're going to push forward with this, whether or not there's a speaker in that position. But even just doing something as simple as a condemnation resolution has become complicated. Congressman Bruce Westerman just echoed this point to me just moments ago. Take a look.
Well, that's the reason why you need stability and why you need to govern, so that when things like this come up, you can react to it and not trying to figure out, parliamentary procedure. What parliamentary procedure do you do where you can even put a resolution on the floor to condemn the attacks? Ever since we've been without a speaker, is the thing we need more than a person is a.
And then adding to this dynamic, there is some talk about whether this would create new pressure for some Republicans to push to reinstate former Speaker Kevin McCarthy to that position. But that's a long shot, it appears right now, because in order for that to happen, we would have to see those 8 Republicans who voted to oust former Speaker Kevin McCarthy to completely change course and change under this new pressure, which right now it's not clear whether that's likely to happen. Now, on top of this, former Speaker Kevin McCarthy did hold a press conference today similar to the style that he used to take when he was acting as Speaker, condemning Israel's the war going on in Israel, but also when he was directly asked about whether or not he would re-enter that race for Speaker, even though previously he said he would not do so. He didn't rule it out. Here's what former Speaker Kevin McCarthy had to say.
That's a decision by the conference. I'll allow the conference to make whatever decision. Whether I'm Speaker or not, I'm a member of this body. I know what history has had, and I can lead in any position it is.
Now, Steve, as for those 2 leading candidates, Chairman of the Judiciary Jim Jordan and Majority Leader Steve Scalise, their response to this Israel situation, they have both vowed to take this as the top priority, giving aid to Israel should they be elected as Speaker. As for the big question of who will take that position, House Republicans are gathering behind closed doors tonight to discuss just that. And tomorrow they're set to hold their candidate forum, and then Wednesday they're set for an internal vote to elect a Speaker. Before they come forward for that full floor vote publicly, this is a way for them to try to show some unity on the floor. They want to decide this before behind closed doors, but all this is up in the air right now. It's unclear if this timeline will move up now with this new sense of urgency surrounding the war. Steve?
NTD's Melina Weiskup at the Capitol with a detailed report. Thank you. And as Israel enters a state of war with Hamas, what are some of the other parties that might be involved? Joining us now to discuss the Chinese Communist regime's connections to the conflict, author of the newly released book, China is Going to War, we have Gordon Chang. Gordon Chang, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Steve.
Of course, Gordon, after the 9/11 attacks and the subsequent war on terror, the United States, rightfully so, exhausting a tremendous amount of resources in the Middle East, much to the benefit of the CCP, allowing the regime to essentially metastasize into an even more dangerous beast. You saw it, but many didn't up until recently. What do we have to watch for now as the conflict plays out in the Middle East with regard to China?
We have to look at China's relationship with Iran, because Iran has often been a proxy for Beijing. And of course, Hamas is a proxy of Iran. So really what we've got here is China fueling these brutal attacks and this invasion of Israel. And we're going to see, I'm sure, Chinese weapons show up on the battlefield. And of course, it's Chinese money that has permitted this. So we have to look at the connections. Xi Jinping is slated to come to the United States in November for the APEC summit. I'm not sure that we should be inviting a war criminal into our country.
The irony of it all is the fact that China actually played a role in providing refuge to the Jews after the Holocaust, pre-1949, of course. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer making a trip to Beijing, which in any news cycle would be a pretty significant event. He urged China to condemn the attacks on Israel, calling Israel as well, calling for solidarity. Why is the CCP so reluctant to do so?
Because it is fully supporting the Palestinians. It is supporting Hamas. And it is going after Israel. We can see this from Chinese propaganda, which at best is dispassionate. At worst, it tries to obfuscate the origins of this war. So it's very clear where Beijing stands. I mean, calling for restraint in this circumstance is completely inappropriate, which is what Beijing has done. We have to let Israel defend itself from these horrific attacks, which are continuing. Beijing knows that it's on the other side. We just have to understand it is on the other side.
Gordon, many senators and members of Congress still not quite ready to call China an adversary. They opt for the term competitor. I've recently heard potential adversary from the Senate Intel chair. What risk do you run by not appropriately designating the CCP?
You don't defend your country, which is what's happening. China has no problem calling us an enemy. They declared a people's war against us in May 2019 in a landmark People's Daily editorial. They have been attacking the United States daily. They kill Americans with fentanyl. The list goes on of China's malicious, unrestricted warfare against the U.S. And so the consequence of this, Steve, is we could lose our country because we're not defending ourselves. We shouldn't be calling them an adversary. We should be calling them what they call us, an enemy.
Lastly, Gordon, Senator Rick Scott introducing legislation to prohibit congressional visits to China on the taxpayer dime. Is this something that you think the majority of the Senate could get on board with?
The majority of the Senate probably wouldn't do that at this moment. What I can say is that Schumer's visit to Beijing right now is ill-advised and inappropriate. Right now, China is on a war footing. It is preparing to kill Americans. And the Senate should be back in session on dealing with critical legislation on procurement, funding of the military, all sorts of things to defend the United States from the Communist Party. And Schumer's, public relations exercise gets in the way of that.
Gordon Chang, as always, really appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.